Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Gopi Jana Ballabha Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Gopi Jana Ballabha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Gopi Jana Ballabha Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivarathari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Hari Sri Vrajaka Jargasto Taratata Shri Srimad Histavanga Sadhaya. Ashto Shirpaki Siddhanta Saraswati Rajaki Ananta Koti Vaishnavindaki Namacharya Shriharas Thakuriki Premza Kahol Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Sri Radha Krishna Govardhana Shamakund Radha Kundgiri Govardhanaki Braj Bhumi Shivindhamadamaki Navdip Mayapur Damaki Purusham Chitra Jagli Pujamaki Ganga Mai ki, Jamuna Mai ki, Bhakti Devi ki, Tulasi Maharani ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Go Premanandi, all glory to some warriors, all glory to some warriors, all glory to some warriors, all glory to the Shri Guru and Shri Granga, all glory to Sri Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Is 16 on the board? What's on the board? 14's on the board. Tani Chaikai Kasha Shastum Tani Chaikai Kasha Shastum Tani Chaikai Kasha Shastum Asamartani Bhotikam Asamartani Bhotikam Asamartani Bhotikam Tani Chaikaikasha Shastum Asamartani Bhotikam Sanghatya Daiva Yogena Sanghatya Daiva Yogena Sanghatya Daiva Yogena Haimam Andam Avasrijan Haimam Andam Avasrijan Haimam Andam Avasrijan Sanghatya Daiva Yogena Haimam Andam Avasrijan Tani Chaikaikasha Shastum Asamartani Bhotikam Samhatya Daiva Yogena Haimam Andam Avasrijan Tani Chaikaikasha Shastum Asamartani Bhotikam Sanghatya Daiva Yogena Haimam Andam Avasrijan. Over to you. Vaishnavis? No? Where are we? Tani. Those elements cha, and eka eka sha, separately, shastum, to produce, asamartani, unable, bhautikam, the material universe, sanghatya, having combined, daiva yogena, by the energy of the Supreme Lord. Haimam, shining like gold. Andam, globe. Avastrijan, produced. Andam often is translated as egg also, which you'll see in the verse. It talks about an egg. And Jagadanda, the universe, the Jagads, they're like an egg. Translation. Separately unable to produce the material universe, they combined with the help of the energy of the Supreme Lord and were able to produce a shining egg. Responsively, please. Separately unable to produce the material universe, they combined with the help of the energy of the Supreme Lord and were able to produce a shining egg. So there is no purport, but I'll read on in a minute. But just to give you a bit of a background here. So, as we understand the previous chapters, it was talking about the earth falling into the Govardhana ocean, and the Lord lifted the earth from the Govardhana ocean. And now Vidura is making further inquiries. This conversation between Maitreya and Vidura has basically been going on since about the 4th or 5th chapter of this canto, and will continue through to the end of the 4th canto. And here we see that Vidura is now asking, and this is verses 9, 10, 11 in this chapter. Vidura is now asking Maitreya to explain the creation of Brahma. He does that in 3 verses. And he's asking, how does he do it? How does he do it? And so what we see here is that Maitreya is answering his question by explaining something he's already explained. If we go back to the 5th chapter of this canto, we'll see that Maitreya explained to him the shaga, the primary creation. That it's described in the beginning of the last chapter of the 2nd canto, the 10 stages or the 10 topics that are explained in a Mahapurana, in particularly in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the first 2 are shaga and vishaga, means the primary creation and the secondary creation. Just like we see, it's understood that the primary creation means that Krishna provides all the ingredients. Everything expands out of his body. And this is what's being explained here. And then we'll see from probably about verse 17 onwards. 16 we see Brahma manifest on the lotus, but then 17 onwards we'll see that Brahma starts to create. So from 17 through to the end of the chapter is where Vidura's questions actually start to get answered. Here he's just recapping what he explained earlier on. And so we'll say here, in verse 12 it says, when the equilibrium of the combination of the 3 modes of nature was agitated by unseen activity of the living entity, by Mahavishnu and the force of time, the total material elements were produced. So there's this manifestation, what's called pradhan. Pradhan means unmanifested material elements, that they're there, they're in equilibrium. There's nothing happening. And it's sometimes referred to as avyakta, unmanifest. And then as it's being described here, when it was agitated by the unseen activity, so the desire of the jiva, it's described how, and that this is described a little bit here, that when Mahavishnu expands into the universe, they come like out of his body like golden eggs or threads, sometimes described, and they conglomerate together like little threads, and they sit down on golden threads, and they sit down on the Karana ocean, the causal ocean. And then he glances at these threads and he enters into them in a second Purusha called Garbhodakshay Vishnu. And then, so what's happening, and then he enters into them as Garbhodakshay Vishnu. He lies down on Sheshanag. This Sheshanag is like a manifestation, a plenary manifestation of Balaram, with the purpose of serving the Lord. And so he lies down on Sheshanag, and then from his navel there comes out a lotus stem, like you'll see like in the pond here, when the lotus comes, first off there's a stem and it's quite pointy. And it's described in various places. I heard this described by Tamal Krishna Goswami like 40 years ago, and I still haven't been able to find the reference, but I'm sure there is a reference for it. That the tip of that lotus, because it's very hard to come through the navel, to come through the navel of Garbhodakshay Vishnu, it must be very strong. So the tip of that lotus is the Icha, the desire of the jiva. So we can see here it's described how when the combination is so the three modes were agitated by this desire of the jiva to want to enjoy, to want to manipulate, to control the material nature. This is one of the things that causes the material nature to come into being. And then as it's saying here, also by Mahavishnu, obviously he has to have his hand in it, as this is Maya Jakshena Prakriti, Suyate Sa Characharam, that by his arrangement, all this is coming into being. Without his influence, it won't happen. Yeah? And then also by the force of time. So, we see that also, so that's the Icha Shakti and the Kala Shakti. They enter into this unmanifested material nature and stir it into motion. And then we see from that the Mahatattva is produced. And this is what's being talked about here in this verse 13, as saying, as impelled by the destiny of the jiva, the false ego, which is of three kinds. And there's two aspects to the false ego. There's the three manifestations of the false ego, which means cause, effect, and the doer. And then there's the false ego in goodness, in passion, and ignorance. And we see there's different manifestations. Predominantly, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes how originally the false ego is predominantly in sattva, but as it comes into the point of starting to create the different manifestations of the material nature, it enters more into the mode of passion, because this is symptomatic of the mode of passion. And then, impelled by, as it's saying here, impelled by the destiny, this desire to enjoy, this desire to manipulate, this desire to control, then the false ego, which is of three kinds, evolves from the Mahatattva. So when the elements are stirred when these non-conglomerate or these unmanifest elements are stirred into life, if you like, by the combination of the desire of the jiva and then the Lord's kala and Icha Shakti, Icha meaning desire, his desire to see the creation come about, then the Mahatattva manifests. And the Mahatattva is like the three modes of nature in a separated form. Yeah? And then from that, all these other manifestations start to take shape, and this is what's being described here. So from this Mahatattva, and in turn the false ego, and it talks about there's many groups of 5 principles, the tanmatras, all these different senses, etc. They manifest, but on their own, these elements, because it's just matter, is unable to produce anything, not unable to produce the material universe. Just like we have all these. If you look at something like any of these things here, basically made up of earth, water, fire, air, ether. 5 elements are there. But if you take those raw ingredients on their own, what can they do? They can't do anything. They're just because they're inanimate. They have no life, independent life. And as it's saying here, separately unable to produce the material universe, they combine with the help of the energy of the Supreme Lord. So this verse is explaining to us how the matter can only be stirred into life by the introduction of a living force. In this case, it's talking about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So because he enters into it in his different energies, then the creation comes into being. You know, the idea that life comes from matter is just farcical. It's just a fairy tale. It can't happen. Well, there is no example we can see in this material universe where life comes from matter. There's always, you can take any element you like. It's just like you have a car, a car or something like a computer. Great device. But until someone comes and pushes the on button, nothing will happen. It will just sit there inanimate, collecting dust for thousands of years, until the jiva comes, or until the living entity comes and introduces some input into it. And that's the same as being described here. How these the Mahatattva is unable to produce anything, but when the energy of the Lord comes, then it comes into this shape of a golden egg. And I'll go on to the next verse. So sayistabdi shalile andakosho niratmaka sagram vaivasha sahasram anvavas vatsit tamishvara. For over 1,000 years, this shiny egg lay on the waters of the causal ocean in the lifeless state. So this is same idea here. It was lifeless. Why? Because there was no energy injected into it by the Lord or by the jiva. Then the Lord entered as Govardhana Vishnu. Yeah? So it's describing how until the Lord entered, it just lay there lifeless. And that's the situation with any object, any material object. Without the injection of a living force, it is lifeless, because it is matter, it is inanimate, it is dull, inanimate matter. And so the scientist's idea that you can generate life from matter is just it's farcical. And as much as they talk about it, they cannot demonstrate one single example of where life has come from matter. And I was having this conversation with someone the other day. They talk about how the scientists will eventually make life. Prabhupada often calls it the theory of the post-dated check. That they'll say, "Oh, in the future we'll do it," and it may be that they will, in the future, in the laboratory, create a life form. I don't know, but it will still take the injection of a living entity for that matter to come to life. And they're working on I know that these technologists, they're very actively working on this artificial intelligence, which is starting to become it's actually quite amazing what you can achieve with artificial intelligence. And right now it's just algorithms where with their computers, because they're analyzing massive amounts of data, and through this analysis of the massive amounts of data, applying it through an algorithm, they're able to come up with what seems like an intelligent response. And no doubt they will keep evolving and keep evolving and keep evolving, and it may come to the point in the future that the situation will be ripe for a living entity to enter into that environment. And they'll think, "Oh, we created life." But no, actually, a jiva entered in there. You can't create life because you can't create spirit. Because spirit, as we see in the Gita, Krishna explains, is like, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall never cease to be. For the soul there is neither birth nor death at any time, has not come into being, does not come into being, will not come into being, is unborn, ever existing, eternal, primeval, not slain when the body is slain." So the fact is a scientist cannot create life. Another living entity cannot create life. Life has come from Krishna. Life has come from God, and the living entities are eternal. Living entities existed before time. So they may think that they're creating life. They may think that they're creating something, but actually no. It's all all this is already existing, and it's just a manipulation of various environments to create a suitable environment where a jiva can come in. It's just like when a child is born. Like sometimes you'll see that people they try, they can't have a child. Why? Because the environment is not right. It's not a ripe environment to create a child. Whereas other people, they quite easily have children. It's just because the environment is fertile. The man is potent, the womb is fertile, then impregnation will happen. So, and this is not something the material scientists can do. We see sometimes, when couples, they can't have children, they go to the doctors try so many different things, they still can't have children. And then sometime it just happens that there's somehow or other the lady gets pregnant and they have a child. Beyond the control of the doctors. And so, purport. From this verse it appears that all the universes are floating in the causal ocean, which actually I was describing before. It describes in the Brahma Samhita how they come out of the body of Mahavishnu, just like bubbles, just like flowing out, very gently flowing out, and they coagulate together and they form golden threads, and these golden threads they then settle down on the ocean. And then verse 16. Tashana Berabhut Padman Sahasra Koro Diditi Sarva Jivani Kayoko Yatra Swayam Vabhut Swarat. From the navel of the personality of Godhead, Govardhana Vishnu, sprouted a lotus flower, effulgent like 1,000 blazing suns. This lotus flower is the reservoir of all the conditioned souls, and the first living entity who came out of the lotus flower was the omnipotent Brahma. So I was describing this before, how this lotus, it comes out from the navel of the Lord. So in his navel, because he's lying on the causal ocean, sorry, not the causal ocean, the Govardhana ocean. And there's waves, and obviously the waves, they splash water on his body and things like that. And so his navel has water in it, it's filled up with water. And then from the middle of this comes a lotus. It's not like you have this big fat lotus stem coming out of his navel. No, his lake, it's described as a lake in his navel, and it's vast. I was just about a month ago. I was in Chicago, and we went down to the shores of Lake Michigan, and it's vast. You cannot see the other side. It's just like an ocean. And you stand on the shore, you look this way, you look that way, you cannot see the limit of it. You can just see the beach. It's just like going down to the ocean. So his navel is like that. It's vast. You cannot see that. If you were standing on one side, you wouldn't realize you were standing on a person. And then this lotus that comes out of the navel. And as I was describing, that point of the lotus, this is the desire of the jivas. All the jivas are contained there. And their desire is what causes this lotus to, obviously through the agency of the Lord, but the desire of the jiva causes this lotus to grow from the navel. And it's saying here that it's the reservoir of all the conditioned souls. And so then this lotus comes out and it grows up and a lotus blooms. And then Lord Brahma, he appears. He's born from the Lord. And sometimes he's called Aja, which means unborn. He has no material birth. He actually comes out by the will of the Lord, and he appears on this lotus. Also, sometimes he's called Padmaja, from the lotus born. And he's born on the lotus. And then he's sitting on this lotus, and he everything's dark. He can't see anything, but he can hear the roaring wind. He can hear the waves. And he's sitting on the lotus, and then he goes down into the lotus, describes for 100 years. He goes down, down, down in the stem of the lotus, and he's trying to find out, where am I? Where did I come from? Who am I? He's got no idea. And then he comes back up, he sits on top of the lotus, and he starts to meditate. Because he heard the words tapa, or the two syllables tapa, which were caused by the waves crashing on the stem of the lotus. And so he meditated for 1,000 years, and then he actually, and this is the Brahma Samhita is the result of his meditation. He realized the Supreme Personality of Godhead through his meditation. Prabhupada's, from the navel of the Personality of Godhead, Govardhana Vishnu sprouted a lotus flower. I read that. So Brahma. Purport. It appears from this verse that the conditioned souls who rested within the body of the Personality of Godhead after the dissolution of the last creation, came out in the sum total form of the lotus. So as the stem comes out, the jivas are there. They're what causes the stem to come out. Their desire to enjoy and to manipulate the material energy. This is called Hiranyagarbha. The first living entity to come out was Lord Brahma, who is independently able to create the rest of the manifested universe. So he's independent. He doesn't need any help. It's coming from his body. He creates the different jivas, especially from his mind, from various angas of his body. He creates different living entities, like the various sages, Kashyapa and Marichi, and all these different personalities. They come out of his body. The four Kumaras, Lord Shiva. It's interesting actually because Lord Shiva, as described elsewhere in the Bhagavatam, how Lord Shiva originally comes from between the eyebrow of the Supreme Lord, but he manifests from Brahma in the same way. So there's a primeval or primordial form of Shiva, and then there's the form that comes out in this universe. And the same we see with Brahma. There's a primeval form of Lord Brahma, which is called Hiranyagarbha, but the Hiranyagarbha referred to here is not the same. I think this is referring to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And there's also the Brahmas that appear in the individual universes. And there's unlimited numbers of Brahmas. Each universe is a different Brahma. And as it's described in the scriptures, there's unlimited universes. And so there's unlimited Lord Brahmas. This is called Hiranyagarbha. The first living entity to come out was Lord Brahma, who was independently able to create the rest of the manifested universe. So, partial creation, the primary creation has been done, and now he takes that and manifests everything we see. The lotus is described here as effulgent as the glare of 1,000 suns. This indicates that the living entities, as parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, are also of the same quality, since the Lord also diffuses his bodily glare, known as Brahma Jyoti. The description of Vaikuntha Loka, as stated in Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literatures, is confirmed herewith. In Vaikuntha, the spiritual sky, there is no need of sunshine, moonshine, electricity, or fire. Every planet there is self-effulgent like the sun. So we see here in this verse, Srila Prabhupada is talking about, obviously, the creation by Lord Brahma. He's talking about how Lord Brahma, or in the purport, how Lord Brahma, he creates the rest of the manifest universe. So Krishna, he puts all the basic building blocks there, and then Brahma takes that, and from that he expands the whole universe as we see it. But it also, Srila Prabhupada is mentioning, he's describing how the lotus here is effulgent as the glare of 1,000 suns. He says this indicates, because that lotus is composed of the desire of the jivas. This is what causes this lotus to happen, is the desire of the jivas. And it's as effulgent as 1,000 suns. So Prabhupada is saying this is indicating that the living entity is also effulgent. And sometimes we see, like in the story of when Shishupal, for instance, was killed, how this effulgent spark, it burst out of his body and went up into the sky, and waited in the sky, then it entered into the body of the Lord. So it's an effulgent spark. The jiva is effulgent, indicating, because we see how it's described, how Krishna is effulgent in an indescribable way. It's saying 1,000 suns. I mean, if you look at the sun, just this one little sun we've got here, it's quite effulgent and it's very difficult to glance upon. But if you can imagine what it'd be like if there are 1,000 suns in the sky, it'd be impossible to look at. And so the analogy is given there that the Lord, his form is like, the effulgence is like 1,000 suns. But then we see also in the, I think it's the Ishopanishad, where it mentions how the Lord's effulgence, the devotee is praying to the Lord to remove the effulgence so he can glance upon his face. So basically he's saying there, your effulgence is so strong, I cannot see you. And this is the nature of the Lord. And actually what happens when people are progressing spiritually is they see the effulgence of the Lord, and because they're not used to such an effulgence, they think that this is everything. This is actually the Lord, but they've only progressed to a certain state. They've only progressed to the point of this Brahman realization. And as Prabhupada describes in the purport to that verse, Vedanti tat tat vidas tat banyaj ganamadvayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti sabjate. He describes how, because this verse is talking about the different stages of realization, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan realization. And it's, in the purport, Prabhupada describes how actually those who are on the Brahman stage of realization or the Paramatma stage of realization, their realization is incomplete. Only one who's actually seen the form of the Lord, their realization is complete. Because the Brahman, they're only seeing the effulgence, or the Paramatma, they see the localized form and the heart of all living entities. But these are only just manifestations, they're plenary manifestations, or the Brahman's a partial manifestation of the Lord's potency. And the Paramatma realization is a plenary form. There's Chiradakshaya Vishnu, there's a plenary form of the Lord, but it's only a partial realization because they're not actually understanding the full function of the Lord, nor the full capacity of the Lord through this realization. And so the Prabhupada is pointing out here that the living entities are also effulgent, like the Supreme Personality of Godhead is effulgent. And as parts and parcels of the Supreme, they're also of the same quality. And this is something that we need to understand, is we have the same quality, but it doesn't mean we're God. And a lot of people become confused with that also, is they think that, well, I have the same quality as the Supreme, therefore I'm the Supreme. But they don't realize the quality is there, but not the quantity. And even we see that some jivas are very, very powerful. You look at Lord Brahma, for instance, very, very powerful. I can't remember the percentage, but there's a percentage given in the Nectar of Devotion. How much percentage of because Brahma is the most powerful of the jivas, but how much percentage he has of Krishna's potency, and it's quite phenomenal. Yet still, he's limited. And in places we see that Srila Prabhupada, he describes that Brahma is almost on the same level as Krishna. So he gives you an idea of like how powerful a living entity is. And we see with personalities like Lord Shiva, he's so powerful that people actually misunderstand him to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's unless someone's very evolved in their understanding of the spiritual process, it's very easy to misunderstand how a jiva, or how Brahma, or how Shiva could be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we see in many of the different spiritual paths, particularly in India, they'll worship all different types of personalities as supreme. But we were having a conversation about this the other day. It's like everything has its lakshana, or its symptoms, and you can understand something through its symptoms. Just like, okay, if I drink this and it's got some, like water basically doesn't really have a taste. But if I drink this and there's some taste there, we can understand it's probably not water, it's probably something else. So water has certain symptoms, or like everything has symptoms. But if the symptoms are, if we don't, like Prabhupada, because Prabhupada was a chemist, and he would talk about potassium cyanide. For instance, potassium cyanide is a deadly poison. And he would often talk about how in the laboratory the scientists will test various chemicals to see, like unknown chemicals to try to identify, or test various chemicals in different ways to establish what the symptoms are. When you do this, when you put it in a certain reaction, it reacts like this. When you mix it with, like for instance, if you mix acid and acid, you get no reaction, but if you mix an acid and an alkaline, you get a reaction. And depending on how powerful the acid and the alkaline are, the reaction is greater. So the symptoms. And one of the ways also that they test chemicals is by tasting. So for instance, you taste salt, it's got a particular flavor. You taste a lemon juice, it's got a particular taste. But he said, the potassium cyanide, nobody knows the taste. Because as soon as you take potassium cyanide, you die. So nobody knows the taste. So, everything has its symptoms. So, when someone identifies, for instance, the Brahman effulgence as being supreme, it means they don't fully understand what the symptoms of the supreme are. So therefore, and same with the Paramatma realization, therefore we see, Prabhupada says, their realization is incomplete. So if someone, in their spiritual practice comes to any other conclusion other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it means they don't understand the symptoms of what is the Supreme fully. They may understand some aspect of it, but they don't understand fully. And this is why the bhakti process is very powerful and very potent, is because the bhakti process, we see how our acharyas and how the scriptures, just like we see here, Maitreya is describing in detail, and it gives more detail, as I said in the 5th chapter. He describes in detail the symptoms of the manifestation, how the manifestation, the cosmic manifestation, comes from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, how he enters into it, how he enables the jivas, etc., to expand this creation. It's described in great detail. And so, by properly understanding the symptoms of a thing, we can identify what it is and what it is not. So this is really an important understanding. All right, I finished there. Any questions or comments at all?
Thanks for the class, Prabhu. My question is, you were talking about Brahma and Shiva having a primeval form as well. What does that actually mean?
Spiritual form.
So they're both jivas, or?
The Brahma, well, in the primeval form, no. They're expansion. My understanding, I mean, I could be wrong, but my understanding of this is they're actually, direct expansions of Krishna. Shiva's not a jiva; he's a special tattva. He's sometimes called Rudra tattva. He's that position between jiva and Krishna. He's in between, and sometimes he's described as Krishna in a form where he becomes contaminated by the modes of material nature. Because the Lord, he cannot become contaminated by the modes of material nature. But if we left it at that, and just said, no, he can't be contaminated, then it'd be incomplete. Because if God is complete, it means he can become contaminated by the modes of nature, but he can't. So how does he do it? He does it in another form. So there's nothing that Krishna can't do. So this is a form of God. So he's not a jiva. But Brahma generally is a jiva. But my understanding is in these primeval forms that these are not jivas. They're like a prototype, if you like, of Brahma. And my understanding also is like our Brahma has 4 heads. This Hiranyagarbha form of Brahma doesn't have 4 heads; it just has 1. But you'll see, because our universe is a particularly small universe, and so our Brahma only has 4 heads. In some of the larger universes, Brahma has millions and billions of heads. This is described in that story in the Krishna book where Brahma goes to see Lord Vishnu Lord Krishna in Dwarka. And then it's an interesting story because he knocks on the door and the doorkeeper says, "Who is it?" And he says, "I am Lord Brahma. I've come to see Krishna." And the doorkeeper says, "I'll go let the Lord know you're here." And so he goes to see Krishna. The doorkeeper goes to see Krishna. And Krishna says, "Ask him which Brahma is it?" And he goes back and says, "My Lord, which Brahma are you?" And he's bewildered. He thinks, "But I'm Lord Brahma." And he's thinking he's actually the one and only Lord Brahma. And so he finally says, "You tell the Lord that it's the 4-headed Brahma." So he goes back and he says, "Okay, tell him to come in." And then he goes in, and simultaneously, this is an extraordinary story when you actually start to think about it. He calls all the Lord Brahmas in creation, but it's not that all the universes are created at once and they all wind up at once. It's an ongoing thing, and there even though there may be many Lord Brahmas manifested at various times, their creation is in various stages of evolution. So when Krishna called all these Brahmas there to Dwarka, it was beyond time and space. Because even Brahmas that haven't been manifest yet, or Brahmas that were manifest in the past, or Brahmas that are in different stages of their evolution, they all came there. And it's beyond, and so it's beyond time and beyond space. Is they all thought that this Krishna was in their creation, but actually it happened in Dwarka in this creation. So you see how there's nothing that Krishna can't do. And so he was able to call all these Brahmas here, from all the different creations, from different times, from different, and they all thought they were still in their own creation. And then, and the interesting thing is, that the four-head Brahma, he was the only one who could see the other Brahmas, because Krishna wanted to teach him a lesson that actually you're just Anu, you're atomic, you're tiny. Oh yeah, thank you. Anything else? No, great. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda ki, Jai Nitai Gopa Premananda.